Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Herzog, and I'm speaking here for the Global Forum on Democratizing Work. And it's a great honor and pleasure to do this interview with Professor Carole Pateman today. She actually needs no introduction for people who are interested in workplace democracy, but I'll say a few words nonetheless. Carole is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Political Science of UCLA, member of the British Academy, and she has received numerous awards for her path-breaking work on feminist theory and political philosophy. Her books include The Sexual Contract and Participation and Democratic Theory, and many others that I can warmly recommend to you. So Carole, you're really one of the pioneers of the modern debate about workplace democracy. How did this happen? How did you get interested in this topic and why?
Well, it was all a bit accidental, actually, because I started, well, the book was actually written for a B.Lit degree at Oxford, but it was never submitted for the B.Lit. I added some more at the urging of my supervisor, Brian Barry, and it was submitted for a D.Phil. So I was interested in participation. Well, everybody was interested in participation. In the 1960s, there was quite a lot of it going on. And so I started looking at the theorists, which is, the first part of the book. And I did that, and then sort of thought, well, what am I going to do now? So I got a bit stuck at that point. So anyway, I had a chat with Brian, and he said, why don't you go in the library and have a look at the work of G.D.H. Cole? And I did that. And somehow then it sort of fell into place what I needed to do. So I, continued and searched out the empirical stuff I could find. And that was the genesis of the book.
Wonderful. So you've read the manifesto on democratizing work. Thanks for that. Which aspects did speak most to you? Which ones did you find most relevant and why?
Oh, well, I think just in general, the idea of democratizing work is badly needed. I mean, I think there was a bit more interest in it again, isn't there?
Hopefully.
Yeah, which is very good. But one thing, well, I liked what you said, obviously. But one thing I would say is you don't say anything about the economic changes and the what's called the gig economy, which I have to admit I haven't, I've given up academic work now. So I haven't thought about it in any great depth. But I mean, you can't escape it, obviously. And I wonder how democratization would work with the gig economy, because you talk about the workplace in a fairly traditional sense, but they seem to be disappearing, those kinds of workplaces.
I didn't know how many of them will really disappear in the long run. That's an empirical question, of course, but there are some very interesting proposals for example, having cooperatives run platforms. There's a movement of platform cooperativism. We haven't included this in the manifesto, that's true. And just the other day, there was an article in The Guardian about maids in hotels organizing via a WhatsApp group. So there are really interesting developments that build on the new technology, not only to exploit workers better, which is what mainly seems to be happening right now, but also to empower workers. And I think that is very interesting and important to take this into account when thinking about democratic work, right? Yeah.
Yes, well, many years ago, actually, in Los Angeles, there was a big movement, justice for janitors, and all the janitors in the big buildings, we're getting organized. That was, oh goodness, yes, that takes me back rather. That one. It's a long time ago. Yes, I was wondering why you hadn't mentioned cooperatives, actually, because they seem to me, I mean, you wouldn't be employed, you'd be a member. And I think getting rid of employment, which is where this subordination comes in, would be a rather good idea.
Yeah, I guess maybe we should have mentioned them. There was a very limited space. It's definitely part of the broader sort of research agenda and the interests that unite the people who are coming together in this democratizing work. I'm not sure if we can already say movement, but there is definitely a group of people and a network of researchers interested in this. And both unions and cooperatives are some of the partners from practical life that we try to speak to and hear what's going on. So what do you see as the sort of the main challenges today, maybe apart from the gig economy, that stand in the way of democratizing work further?
Well, I guess one thing is that you haven't heard much about it for a long, long time now. Well, at least I haven't. Just reading the, general news and watching news on TV and things, looking at things online. No one seems to talk much about it anymore. But maybe that's just because I read the wrong things or something. Maybe there is more interest.
I think for a long time it was actually not really part of the general discussion. And I studied economics from 2002 to 2007. And it was in Germany where we have a strong codetermination tradition. So you'd think you'd learn.
Oh, yes, of course, yeah.
Nothing whatsoever. From my studies, I would have thought there cannot be cooperatives and there cannot be codetermination. So I think the ideology that was expressed in economic doctrines did not make space for it. So,
no, because neoliberalism has had everyone in its tight grip for quite some time. Although I think that with the pandemic and everything, I think that maybe had its day to some extent.
From your perspective, I mean, you say you're not doing academic research any longer, but what would you say to other academics? What can we do to help further this process? Do you see any opportunities in the near future for pushing in this direction?
Oh, well, I'm sure there will be and probably are some opportunities. I mean, I think the main thing is to start from where you are and just keep working away at it, and trying to spread the word. And so having, discussions like this one that we're having at the moment.
When you wrote about workplace democracy, did you get invited to speak, for example, to companies or politicians? Was there general uptake in this idea at the time?
No, not really to companies or anything. I don't remember that. I mean, there was a lot of academic interest. And who did it? Oh, and I think, trying to remember, I mean, this book is 50 years old.
But I think still read it. That's fantastic.
I think it's actually 51. So it's a long time to remember. I think I talked to some architects or an architecture school in London at the time, but I don't remember speaking to companies or anything of that sort.
I mean, academic research
anyway.
Do you think there is something that people in my generation and younger might learn from the interest in the academic work on participation in that period that we maybe, that was forgotten over the years? Is this something that we think we should take on again?
Well, I mean, you're taking it on at the moment. The whole question of democratizing workplaces or employment more generally. I mean, you mentioned in the manifesto about coming unemployment, mass unemployment. I'm sure you're right. I can't see how they can go on employing people as they have in the past. I mean, technology is changing, everything's changing. So I think there would be an interest anyway in the end in it. But so the question is how it will change.
What's your take on that? How do you think it will go, and how do you think it should go?
Well, I mean, I think it should go, excuse me, in the way in which we're discussing some form, at least, of democratization. But it's interesting. I mean, if there's going to be a lot of unemployment, which I suspect will, along with you, will be the case, how will that fit in?
Yeah.
I mean, this is why I think another reason that cooperatives are interesting, because workers, well, there are plenty of examples actually, you know, in recent years of workers taking over factories that have gone under and turning it into cooperatives. So that may be, you know, one way forward. Or otherwise, we can just change a lot of our ideas about how we live.
And do you think that the proposal of a public job guarantee is a good one, of the state as employer of last resort?
Well, what would they employ them as?
Well,
what would the jobs be?
Well, there are many areas where one can think about socially useful activities for which currently there is no money to pay for them. Taking care of children, of nature, of communities. I mean, I'm not sure it's a matter of not finding the tasks. It's a question of, would there be money to pay for them?
Well, I'm sure there is money, but they just don't want to use it on those sorts of things.
So in general, you would endorse the idea.
So on.
Yeah, so you would endorse the idea that there could be more public employment as a response to greater unemployment in the future?
Well, there could be, but if there's a lot of technological unemployment, as it were, with technology and everything changing, would there be enough jobs in the sense in which we understand it now?
So we would need more radical
absorb everyone.
Yeah.
This is why I think we have to, you know, be thinking along other lines.
And what would be some of these lines?
Well, I say the only thing I've actually thought about it, insofar as I've thought about any of this very, very deeply, would be some kind of cooperative type of organisation.
So kind of bottom-up approach.
Yes. So then you could have democracy, as well as you talk about, you know, helping the environment if it's not too late. And doing other sorts of useful things.
Which of course needs a totally different sense of what counts as useful, which is not in terms of market value.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Which would be a big change, of course. Whether it will happen, who knows? But
so a complete rethinking of what we value and why we value it in a way, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And how we live, why we live like this, and what other ways could we live? Do we want to make these changes? You know, it's a very big topic.
It is. And I mean, you're also a very famous feminist theorist. Are there any specific feminist angles on that whole topic that you would like to talk about?
Oh, well, I mean, there are an awful lot of things that would be very good for the position of women. I mean, I have to say, I really haven't been reading any of this literature for some while now, so I'm not sure how much feminists have been talking about it. I got a bit fed up with it when it all dissolved into talking about difference. You know, it was interesting up to a point, and after that point, I mean, what else could you say? If all you do is talk about difference, what about generalities, which are still important? So, but I'm sure, I mean, democratized workplaces, for instance, would give women a different position in a workplace.
To negotiate different tasks and work-life balance.
Yes,
and so on.
And they would be sharing in the government of it.
Yeah.
Making decisions.
And it's actually really interesting that the tops of, you know, companies, that's still a totally male domain with very few women in them. So
yes, I have seen some numbers, which of course I can't remember, but I mean, I think there's been a minor improvement, but there's been an awfully long way to go before there are women sitting at the top in the boardroom.
So do you have any sort of general words of wisdom or suggestions that you would like to share with the participants of the Global Forum on Democratizing Work? And just to say again, those are people from academia, but also from different organizations, unions, progressive businesses. What would be your message for them?
Well, one other thing I've been interested in is basic income, which I think really fits rather nicely with democratizing workplaces, and that would be a huge boon for women, because it would, if it was implemented universally to each individual, not households, individuals, then for the very first time, all women would have a guaranteed income. If it was, of course, the crux of it is the level at which it's set. But if it was set, then what was my wording was, a modest but decent standard of life. If it was set at that sort of level, then that would make a huge difference for women. Because for the first time, they would have enough resources to leave nasty situations and bad employers. And the same would go for men as well. And that actually seems to have, in different forms, that seems to have become quite popular these days.
And there is actually still a lot of debate, but there are also practical experiments of how it could be implemented. There are also feminists who think it would be a trap for women to keep them out of the labor market, or at least the attractive parts of the labor market. But you don't think this? You think it would
I mean, that could happen. But my hope would be that there would be enough discussion of it and would raise all the questions about the interrelationship between employment and marriage, which is fairly crucial. That ideas might start changing about everything.
So if you don't think about the household as the basic economic unit, but really the individual, that of course changes a lot.
And I say about the interrelationships between the household and the world of work and employment and so on. And
and how complex these topics are, because it's all related. And
I mean, if it was ever implemented at a sufficient level for people to be independent, if they were willing to live at a lower level of comfort, possibly, at least temporarily, then I think things might change and people might start thinking differently.
So you think that if you had change in the institutional structures, that would also lead to change at the level of ideas and ideologies and the value systems that people hold?
Well, the two things are very closely interrelated. I mean, a lot of the historical work I've done has been trying to show how we've got to where we are today, and the ideas that were involved, to show that either change the ideas or at least interpret the ones we're so familiar with very differently, because they could be interpreted very differently. That's about equality or democracy or whatever.
That is a very important task that historians of ideas and philosophers can contribute, I think, to explain all these unquestioned assumptions that go into the ways in which we think about work and the economic realm and family today.
Yes. Oh, well, I mean, families have changed tremendously, even since I wrote The Sexual Contract, which, that's over 30 years ago.
And you probably contributed a bit to the change. I mean, the book was very influential.
Well, I would like to hope so. That's a big thing to say.
Of course. Let me say it.
But it would be wonderful, I've made a small contribution.
I'm pretty sure you did, yeah.
But I mean, the whole legal framework and so on has changed.
Yeah.
So there has been some progress. There's a
Yeah.
long way to go, but at least there's been some discernible progress.
Now there have been discussions about COVID, the pandemic, and whether that has thrown women back. At least those who had to care for young children when the schools were all closed and so on.
Yes.
So those are still very, very intense ongoing discussions.
Well, and the fact that basic income is now so widely discussed, I mean, it's astonishing. I mean, some years back, if you looked at the website, you know, there would be 2 or 3 things on there. Now you look at the website and there's, you know, you just scroll on, and there are all these experiments and people discussing this, that, and the other. You know, it's quite an amazing change.
You mean the basic income network?
Basic income, yes.
Yeah, no, that is really a booming area. I mean, there is some discussion also among the members of the Democratizing Work Manifesto whether basic income or public employment are the better strategy, because public employment would also have some of the advantages of basic income, in the sense that people get out of other forms of employment, but maybe also out of family structures and so on, because they would have an income, but they would also have work. And so those are some of the debates that we're actually still having.
Yes, I'm sure.
I find it very interesting. I think, generally speaking, work is more for people than just money. In that sense, I think, I guess I have I favor the idea of public employment, of course, voluntary, not at all mandatory. But I'm happy to have these discussions, and I argue a lot with people who are more in favor of a basic income. What could be?
Well, I think we could have both, actually. We could have democratization and a basic income, but I favor the basic income because it would enable people to be outside employment altogether.
Yeah.
And I think employment is one of the problems we face, actually, rather than one of the answers. Although, I mean, obviously people like to work and need to do things, but it doesn't have to be organized in the way it is these days.
So you'd call
in this hierarchical structure. And these huge corporations, I mean, how do we tackle them?
Well, that is a really good question. And I've come to think that unless we democratize them, we'll never be able to prevent them from committing terrible moral failures. So for me, that was one of the paths into the whole workplace democracy debate. Seeing these huge corporations, how can these be sort of ethically tamed, not even from a democratic perspective, to just very basic moral norms? That was what led me to workplace democracy. But I agree that that is really a very interesting question. And yeah, there are questions about what we would like to see, and then there are politically more realistic questions about what we might be able to expect in the near future.
Oh, well, yes, in the near future, I don't think we're going to see the end of those corporations. In the longer term, I think we need to think about ways of tackling them,
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree. And especially if they are so powerful that they can hold democratic structures hostage, basically. And that's what we currently see. So
yes,
it's definitely a task for the future to take on, yeah, or the present already. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, if you look at their what do you call it? Profits and incomes, these corporations. I mean, they're bigger than most reasonable sized states.
That's true, yeah. And they can put the governments of these smaller countries under pressure. So democratic decision making really gets pushed to the side. Yeah.
Oh, and while we're at it, we could also democratize the IMF and etc.
Well, I guess we could continue this a long time. But I mean, thank you so much, Carole, for talking to me and thereby talking to the members of the Global Forum. It was really a pleasure and an honor to have you. Any last statement you want to make?
Well, I'd like to thank you for inviting me. I mean, it's enjoyable to talk about things of this sort. Well, I just hope, your work comes to some fruition in the near future.
Thank you. We hope so too. Great.